Hi guys, today we're going to talk about American political culture. This is your only lecture in Unit 2. Congratulations! This is the only time this will happen. What we have here are two paintings or photographs of people saying the Pledge of Allegiance, which leads me to point one, the Pledge of Allegiance. Originally, it was written in 1892 by Francis Bellamy, who was a socialist minister. The original text read, "I pledge allegiance to my flag and the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all." You probably noticed we've made some minor changes, including changing my flag to the flag of the United States. Also adding under God, which happened during the Red Scare. That's also when we added under God to our money because, commies are all godless. It was just a way to separate us from Stalin. But yeah, it wasn't initially there. And the interesting thing about that is it was written by a minister and he didn't put it in. And also that minister was socialist. It's weird. Anyway, that's the history of it. In 1940, the Supreme Court ruled in Govitz versus the U.S. that schools can actually compel students to recite the pledge. The U.S. Congress recognized the pledge officially in 1942, and in the 50s, during one of the Red Scares, of course, they added the phrase under God. In 1943, the Supreme Court overturned the Govitz decision and ruled in its Barnett decision that school children cannot actually be forced to recite the pledge as part of their daily school routine. Now, most schools still do it. Technically, we cannot make you say it, but it's still legal to have. Alright, political culture. That is a set of widely shared beliefs, values, or norms concerning the ways that political and economic life ought to be carried out. And political culture relates to citizens through government, from person to person, and with people's relationship to the economy. So those are the places where you really see political culture, how you respond to other people, your opinions on the economy, and obviously your opinions on the government. There are two types of political culture, conflictual and consensual. It sounds weird, but it's not. Conflictual political culture is when you have groups with opposing beliefs and values clashing with one another, like your Facebook feed. Consensual is obviously less conflictual and focuses more on consensus. It centers more around things like compromise and understanding other viewpoints and trying to come to common ground. So obviously, in the United States, we are more conflictual than consensual. And you guys have seen examples of that in your day-to-day life on the internet and elsewhere. Alexis de Tocqueville, who you should remember from U.S. history, he was a French political scientist, and he wrote the first real study of American democracy in the 1830s. And it's a good account of American democracy because it's a foreign account, so it's not going to have it gives an outsider's perspective that's not necessarily biased in the way that an American would present it. Now, having said that, it does have its biases, but it is a good account. So according to de Tocqueville, the four key factors of success in an American democracy is having A, abundant and fertile land, B, opportunities to acquire land and make a living, so this idea that you can pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of American dreamy. The lack of a feudal aristocracy, remember the feudal system from world history, and we don't have an aristocracy officially here. And then the last part is an independent spirit encouraged by frontier living. That's kind of what the U.S. is known for, whether we're talking about the Wild West frontier or the final frontier that is space. We will go to Mars, by God. So these are our shared core values in American politics. Whether you're conservative or liberal, you share these core values typically, unless you're the worst. Liberty, equality, individualism, which is sometimes called rugged individualism. Herbert Hoover, I think, coined that. democracy, rule of law, and civic duty. If you do not know the specific definitions of these, I suggest you get your textbook out and look at them. But these are all civics and economics terms. All right, flipped classroom assignments. Here we go. This is how it should look in your notebook, and here is your first assignment. We're not using partners. That was supposed to be deleted. Sorry about that. For each of the core values on the previous slide, describe where they come from. Are they from the Constitution, the Declaration, or just the desire to be different from our former imperial power, aka the British? And then make connections to de Tocqueville's 4 factors. So again, you're looking at these core values, explaining where they come from, and then you're going to connect them to Tocqueville's factors. So feel free to flip back and forth in the PowerPoint if you need to. All right, changing values. We'll focus on the economy first. We have always, at least since Alexander Hamilton, been pretty heavily focused on capitalism. Capitalism is a system in which your wealth is based on your money and other goods. It also includes free enterprise, which is the idea that you have economic competition without restraint from the government. And the ideas of capitalism and free enterprise were outlined originally in the book Wealth of Nations, which was written by Adam Smith. So the question is, capitalism in its original form reinforces this idea of individualism. It's every man for himself. You can achieve the American dream, but it's up to you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, etc., etc., etc. But in the 1930s, there's a shift because capitalism collapses the economy and nearly leads to the destruction of the United States. And because capitalism caused this, there's a near collapse of that system in and of itself. So in the 30s, especially under FDR, the U.S. starts to look at that part of the preamble about promoting the general welfare, and what does that actually mean? Is the government responsible for taking care of people in the event of an economic collapse? They're responsible for taking care of people in a military, if there's a military collapse or an issue. So this is where we start to see changes in the values of our country. You probably read FDR's second Bill of Rights, which he proposed at the 44th State of the Union. These are the key points. He says the right to a useful and remunerative job in industries or shops or farms or mines of the nation. People have the right to earn enough to provide adequate food and clothing and recreation. People have the right of every farmer to raise and sell products at a return which will give him and his family a decent living. People have the right of every businessman, large and small, to trade in an atmosphere of freedom and unfair competition. Freedom from unfair competition and domination by monopolies at home or abroad. People have the right of every family to a decent home. They have the right to adequate medical care and to the opportunity to achieve and enjoy good health. They have the right to adequate protection from economic fears of old age, sickness, accident, and unemployment. And they have the right to a good education. So this is a very specific and intense interpretation of what general welfare means. And we've done nothing but expand, well, not nothing, but we've done a lot to expand on these ideas through the creation of a pretty robust welfare state up until now in our history, starting with FDR. So the question is, does the second Bill of Rights as proposed by FDR change our shared values of capitalism and FDR? How do these principles, how could they be applied to the actions of post-FDR administrations? So, do these things change our ideas of capitalism? If so, how? And how can these principles be applied to presidential administrations after FDR? How have presidents done it? How should they do it? You can go either way. All right, I am going to post an article with this lecture from NPR from 2010. I think I mentioned it in class today. It's from the Pew Polling Center, and it's about public trust in the government. So there's an NPR article about it. So you're going to answer these questions from that article. Do Americans trust the government? How has trust in the government changed over the years, and what factors impact the trust in government? And then lastly, what occurred in trust immediately after 9/11, and why did that happen? So again, for these questions, you'll refer to the NPR article that'll be attached with the lecture. Okay, political efficacy. This relates to how efficient the political system or the government system is. It's the citizen's capacity to understand and influence political events. There are two parts to efficacy. There's internal efficacy, which is just that you understand how politics works. This type of political efficacy hasn't really changed in the last 50 years. What has changed is external efficacy. This is how individual interactions with politics matters or makes a huge difference. We've seen increases in protests, interest groups, all sorts of things. This relates to the feeling that the government is too big to be sensitive to individual citizens. So we start to see more people joining groups, whether it's a political party or an interest group or a protest group, to interact with the government because they believe that they can make a difference, and they believe that by joining these factions that they can make a difference, because if they don't do these things, then the government will not be responsive to them. All right, here's this question again. I think this is the last one that I have for you. Is American political culture conflictual or consensual? Can it be both? I think it can, but this is opinion-based. Please explain your answer. Yep, that looks like it. I'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good afternoon.